see, I don't have anything written down. And the only way I know how to prep for something like this is spiritually. And so I've tried to do that, and I pray that I'll have something that will be a message. So I guess one of the first things I'll tell you is that as you look at me, you may see me and you may think, man, I would never wear those shoes. Dude looks like a clown. Or you may be looking for reasons to separate yourself from what I'm going to tell you. And what I'm going to ask you to do is maybe try to figure out what we have in common. Maybe look at some of the emotion and some of the things that underlie this, because I think we all relate on that level. My name is John Redd, and I am an alcoholic. I am grateful to be here. I was more or less raised in Farmington, Utah. I live in Farmington, Utah now, actually. I'm the oldest of 6 kids, and there were 5 boys in a row and then a girl. None of this is the reason I'm an alcoholic. Carrie, my voice. Okay. I was told up higher, maybe. Okay, so none of this is the reason I'm an alcoholic. So let me tell you, I was raised in a home that was very religious, which meant in my world I always knew what the rules were. And I always knew how important the rules were, because the rules were something that was really enforced at my house. When I was 6 years old, we moved to Paris, France. And I couldn't speak the language. And I remember learning how to say, je m'appelle, just my name is, Jonathan. And I got put into French-speaking schools. And I remember how anxious and how nervous I was the morning I went to the first day of school. And the interesting thing for me was that anxiety wasn't foreign. It was something that I was just used to. I don't know if I can say this on the podcast, but like, does anybody in here relate to just waking up in the morning and having your first thought be, oh shit? Like, what's coming today? Oh shit is the way that I've started my whole life for years. And I remember going into school and having that, but it wasn't foreign. And so I was just a guy who was always anxious, never felt like I fit in. I could come here and I could look at you guys and I could think, man, they look so remarkably comfortable. What is wrong with me? Like, why don't I get the peace that they get? And that was kind of how I lived my life. And so we lived in France for a couple of years, and then we moved back to Utah when I was 8. And that's when we moved back to Farmington. So I'll skip a lot of growing up, but good parents. And what happened when I was 14 years old, the summer in between 8th and 9th grade, and I think a lot of us start somewhere 13, 14, like it seems to be a pretty common age. And what happened for me is my buddy came over and he brought over some Smirnoff mini bottles. And at the age of 14, I learned how to pronounce Smirnoff. I had it. And we mixed it with some orange juice. And I still don't remember what kind of orange juice it was. I don't remember if it was like a tangy or if it was flat, because the orange juice didn't matter. I drank 3 of those mini bottles, and I went out in the neighborhood that night, and suddenly I was able to make eye contact with girls, which was a huge deal for me. I thought that the people around thought I was pretty funny. I thought I was funny. And I thought to myself, man, I think I've figured out how I'm going to be a part of this world. My dad had just gotten called to be the bishop. So when I tell you it was a religious house, it was very religious. And I knew that I was breaking the rules. But that didn't last long, because I just knew that if I was to be a part of this world, I had to keep it going. And so in my life, I kept it going. I was somebody who was able to get decent enough grades and hold a job. And when I did that, it kept my parents off my back a little bit. And kind of through high school, I started experimenting with other drugs and a lot of things. And what happened in my life is I graduated high school. It was 2 days after graduating high school. And my dad came home, and I was out back behind the house having a cigarette. And Bishop Redd came home and came back, and he looked at me and he said, you know what, John? He said, my guess is I've warned you 50 times about smoking back here. And I can tell you now, looking back at it, that was probably a lie. My guess is he'd probably warned me 100. And he said, you know what, man, you have to go. And so I packed a bag and I left. And I moved down to Salt Lake, and I thought that I had, like, it was 3 dudes in a 1-bedroom apartment. I don't even remember if I slept on the couch or the futon. Like, it didn't matter. I thought I had arrived. Like, I could go to bed when I wanted. We could keep what we wanted in the house. And a few things happened during that time. And I ended up crossing lines. And I think in this disease, we cross lines we say we'll never cross. I remember one of those first lines for me was when I first tried cocaine. I knew I'd never do cocaine. And then my roommate's little brother was an IV user. And I knew I'd never be an IV user. Like, not me. And he brought home some drugs one night, and he said, I'll just split it up for us. And he put mine in an IV. And I remember that night. And I remember the 30-minute conversation about how this is not something I will ever do. And then what happened is that night I became an IV user. I was 18 years old, and for the next 6 months, I shot up daily. And it was, I'm 6'3", and I'm like 205 pounds. I wear the coat to hide my weight. It's easy. But and when I went into treatment, then I was 6'3", and I was 140 pounds. And the way I went to treatment was my mom called me and asked if she could come visit me. And I told her she could come down to Salt Lake, but she couldn't come in the apartment. She came down and we walked on the street for a second. And she said, you know what, John, I've been praying about you. And I want to help you. And I think there are some times in our life we get this courage that we usually don't have. And I had just this spurt of courage at that moment. And I said, can you put me in treatment? And so my mom got me, and we went, and I went to detox, and I went to treatment. And so that's the first time I went to treatment at 19 years old. And here's the interesting part of my story. I went to treatment, and I sat in rooms just like this, with a lot of folks just like us, and I finally figured I had found like people I could relate to. I always thought I had been this like black sheep of the entire family, and somehow I kind of found a herd of black sheep. And I thought, man, this is going to be it. And so after treatment, I went and got a degree in psychology. I went to the Graduate School of Social Work up at the University of Utah and got what was called an LSAC, which is a licensed substance abuse counselor. I got married and started a family after graduating those programs, and then decided that I was going to go back and get a little bit more school. So I went and got a MBA from BYU. If you listen to my education, it's going to tell you 2 things about me, probably pretty clearly. One, I had no plan. If you get a career counselor that says go get psychology, licensed substance abuse, master's in business, fire them. They have no idea what they're talking about. I had no plan, but I stayed in school because school felt safe to me. I was always anxious, I was always nervous, and I knew that while I was in school, I was okay. That's the first thing it should tell you. The next thing it will clearly tell you, and once you hear more of my story, you'll know this to be true, is that I'm way overeducated for my level of intelligence. Not that smart of a dude, but somehow I got a couple degrees. Don't know how that happened. And so I was married, I graduated my MBA program, and I want to take you to a very specific day in my life. And I will tell you what that day is. It was St. Patrick's Day of 2003. I'll tell you why I remember St. Patrick's Day of 2003. I graduated the MBA program. I just got my dream job in medical sales. We were selling our house and we were moving down to Las Vegas. And I was out front of my house in Farmington, and I was kind of cleaning it up and getting things ready. And what happened was I got a phone call that night from the doctor. And I'd gone to see the doctor just to get some testing done before leaving town. Saw the family doctor, and the doctor called me that night And he said, John, I got your test results back. It was 5:45 at night. Like, that's how specific I remember this. And he said, we got your test results back and they're suspicious. I had no idea what suspicious meant. So I remember saying, okay, cool, doc. Well, like, what's suspicious? And he said, John, you have cancer. He said, I'm concerned. I need you to come in tomorrow morning. I'm going to clear my schedule and I need you to clear yours. And I remember going into the doctor's office that next morning. And up until that point, my world was just smooth. Some of us who have read the big book, we've seen the part on the bottom of page 60 that talks about being the actor and the director and arranging the lights, the scenery, and the ballet. And I had done all of that, and the show was coming off great. And I got that phone call that night. And what happened in my life is I went the next morning and asked the doctor what the prognosis was. And some of you can see the scar on my neck. And he said, John, you have stage 4 thyroid cancer. And I knew stage 4 was bad. And I remember asking him what we were looking at. And he said, John, I'll give you 6 months. It's the worst case scenario. And my thought suddenly went to, I've got a son who's 2. My wife is pregnant with our twins. And who's going to raise these kids? And I went home and my wife asked me what the doctor had said. And I lied. I lied because I was worried about how it would affect her. And I said, the doctor said we're going to be okay. I went right in for the first surgery. I was supposed to be in the hospital for a couple hours, or in surgery for a couple hours, and in the hospital for 2 days. The surgery lasted all day, and I didn't get out of the hospital until about 10 days later. And as a result of the first surgery, they severed a branch of my spinal accessory nerve. And I was given a bottle of OxyContin, and I was told, good luck. By a lot of grace, I've had the opportunity to be sober 4.5 years, and I've thought for 4.5 years how much pain I was in, and I do not remember. But I remember in my life that I would take a pill, and suddenly all this fear of dying, all these concerns would go away. And it became my tool for coping. So I went for rounds of treatment, and then went for another surgery at Huntsman Cancer. More rounds of treatment, and then eventually I went for a surgery in the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And I went back there, and I had this weird thing that happened where while I was there, I felt like there was some hope. I met with the doctor, and it was the first time in this process. It was 3 years into this, and suddenly I felt like, man, there might be a way to get out of this. And I went in for that surgery, and I remember the doctor came to me after the surgery and after the scan, and the doctor said to me, John, I've got great news for you. We've got it all. And I mean, you would assume that's great news. And I remember my first thought, I was sitting there and I thought, man, now what am I going to do with my life? I knew I was hooked on pills. I was drinking about 1/5 a night to fall asleep. And then I had this thought that, John, you have a degree in this, pull yourself out of it. I have a sobriety date. My sobriety date's August 24th of 2017. This was the beginning of 2007. I spent the next 10 years trying to pull myself out of it. What happened over those 10 years is we moved from Las Vegas back up to Utah, thinking that maybe a change of a change of scenery would make a difference. The problem is that when we moved, I brought me with me. Okay, if I could have left me down in Vegas, I would have been just fine. But somehow I made the trip too. My wife and I ended up having another kid. Because, kids fix things. Well, they're great. I wouldn't trade the kid, but it didn't fix anything. And over the course of the 10 years, I lost all the jobs that were so important to me. I struggled. I struggled. And I just kept thinking, John, you need to pull yourself out of this. And I want to tell you kind of what happened in my life. And so it was the summer of 2017. And that summer, we were going on a family vacation in Newport Beach, California. And I was so stoked to go to Newport Beach, California. Has anyone in here been to Newport? Something about Newport, it's always 80 to 85 degrees in Newport. It doesn't even matter which month you're there. The sun's always setting over the ocean. It's always just this beautiful thing, and I was so excited to go to Newport. And it was going to be my wife and I and our 4 kids, and we were going with my in-laws because it's what they gave us for Christmas, is a trip to Newport. And it was a couple days before the vacation, and my wife came to me and uninvited me on the trip. And my wife's heard me tell this story enough times that she's like, I'm not even going tonight, John. I've heard it 3 times last week. And I know, it's a lot. And she's like, plus I lived it. And my wife pulled me aside a couple years ago, and she said, you keep telling people you got uninvited to Newport. She said, that is so not the case. She said, you were never invited to start with. She goes, I just had to tell you. And turns out that was entirely accurate. And so I stayed home, and what I tried to do was pull myself out of it again. My wife and kids were in Newport, and I remember them calling and telling me it was the best vacation they've ever had. And I knew why it was the best vacation they ever had. It's because I wasn't there to ruin it. And I was so nervous about going when I thought I was going, because I thought, man, am I going to get sick? What's going to happen? And I was home, and it was me and the dog, and the only way I know how to explain this is that there are some times in life where life gets so heavy. Just too heavy. And you wake up and your first thought is just, how do I get through today? And you do your best, and then you wake up the next morning, and it's worse. And I was in that spot. Life had never been this heavy before. I couldn't think of any way out of it. And I did the only thing I could think of at the time. So I went around the house and I locked all the doors and I pulled all the blinds, which was just the weirdest thing because nobody came to visit me. I wasn't a dude people came over and said, hey, let's watch the game together. I don't know if we have any Harry Potter fans in here, but the way someone explained it to me one time and it made complete sense is you were the Dementor. You were the dude that sucked the life out of anybody that came around, and nobody went to go visit the Dementor. And I'm very accurate. And so it was me. I was home alone, and it was Tortino's pizza, and that's all I had had for a week. And I did the only thing I could think of. So I locked the doors, and I pulled the blinds, and I went down to a basement. And I went into the bedroom down there, and I shut that door, and I locked it. And I sat on this bed and I said the most sincere prayer I've ever said in my entire life, which was simply, God, if there's a way out of this, please help me. I think one of the gifts I've been given in recovery is that I've never forgotten what that felt like. And I got up and I left the room, and like at that moment, nothing happened. And 2 days after saying that prayer, the job I was barely holding on to asked me not to come in to work anymore. My wife came home from Newport Beach with the kids, and she had this resolve on her face, it was scary. And she looked at me and she just said, man, I don't care if we stay married or get divorced. I don't even care anymore. But you have to leave. And my 4 kids, the oldest was 17. My twins were 14 and my youngest was 9, and I couldn't even get them to make eye contact with me. And so then I went up to my parents' house and I asked them for help. My parents have raised a couple alcoholics, so they're good enablers. So I was kind of expecting some good enabling, and what happened is they looked at me and they said, you know what, John, we're willing to help you, but we're not going to help you your way anymore. And if you would have asked me at the time, I would have told you everything that was important to me in my life had fallen apart. It felt like my world had crumbled at the foundation. And a day after that, I had a chance to go to treatment. I am a firm believer today that sometimes when we feel like our world's falling apart, it's God's way of bringing it together. But when we're in the middle of it, we can't see it. What happened in my life today was it was the beginning of it coming together. I remember getting ready for treatment, and we'll stop after I tell you my first day of treatment and maybe show you my picture, but it was August 24th and I'd fully detoxed, and it was bad enough for me that I do not remember the last drug I took, and I do not remember the last thing I drank. I remember 5 years of not having one single sober day. I remember 3 Christmases of being in the basement crying, thinking, man, I'm never going to do this to my kids again. And I was going to treatment, and my twins, who were 14, were in the kitchen, and my wife didn't take me to treatment. My mom dropped me off. She didn't even get out of the car. She stopped, popped the trunk. She's like, bye. It was that bad. And I remember that morning, and I remember looking at my twins, Molly and Charlie. And I remember saying, guys, I'm going to be gone for a couple months. Can I get a hug? And Charlie just came up and patted me on the arm. He said, good luck, Dad. And he turned and walked off. And my daughter, who was across the room, she looked at me and she said, you know what, Dad? I'm late for the bus. I'm going to tell you, it wasn't until that moment that I actually realized the impact that my usage had had on my kids. I'd always thought I wasn't using with them, I wasn't using in front of them, I wasn't affecting them. And I had become so disconnected from everything in my life that I loved. I got tired of hearing, if you loved your kids more. I remember one time my dad decided that telling me my moral compass was broken was a good idea. And I thought, no. It's an interesting disease that I have, because it's a disease of knowing better but not being able to do better when you're in it. I always knew better, but I couldn't do better. So the morning I went to treatment, I got dropped off, and I'll show you my picture, and we can stop at this point. This was my intake photo. And my favorite part about this photo was that because I had detoxed, I remember when it was taken, and I remember thinking, damn, John, you're looking good. Like your wife is a lucky woman to have all this. She does not know what she's missing. Because that was probably the best I had looked in 3 years. And I've got a lot of respect for that guy, because he survived long enough to get me here. And that was my first day sober.